Chapter 5 American History. Too much democracy. Debating the Congress. The Constitution. The evils we experience flow from the excess of democracy. The people do not lack virtue, but are the dupes of pretended patriots. In Massachusetts, it had been fully confirmed by experience that they are daily misled into the most baneful measures and opinions by the false reports circulated by designing men, and which no one on the spot can refute. Elbridge Gerry, Massachusetts delegate at the Constitutional Convention, May 31st, 1787. When the Revolution began, in 1775, most American patriots believed they were fighting for their rights as Englishmen. After a year of bloodshed, however, the colonists increasingly asserted that the time had come for a formal break with Great Britain. In June of 1776, Richard Henry Lee introduced a resolution to the Continental Congress that declared the 13 colonies free and independent states. A formal Declaration of Independence, drafted primarily by Thomas Jefferson of Virginia, was adopted by Congress on July 4, 1776. The rebellion against Great Britain, however, dragged on. Eventually, the American Revolutionary Army, led by George Washington of Virginia, aided substantially by Great Britain, old enemy France, outlasted the British. Led by George Washington of Virginia and aided subsistently by Great Britain's old enemy, France, outlasted the British. After a decisive Franco-American victory at the Yorktown in 1781, the British lost the will to continue the fight. American independence was formally secured in 1783 with the Treaty of Paris. The Articles of Confederation. A written document specifying the powers to be exercised by the Continental Congress was not approved until after independence had been declared. Between 1776 and 1777, a committee appointed by Congress and headed by John Dickinson drafted the United States of America's first Constitution, the Article of Confederation and Perpetual Union. By July of 1778, 8 of the states have ratified the article, but boundaries disputed between others thwarting an unanimous adopted until 1781. The articles were intended to formalize a firm league of friendship between the 13 states and foster a common defense against external enemies. The Articles authorized the national government of the United States to address matters relating to its defense. Foreign relations and Amerindian affairs, internal affairs, however, were left to the states themselves, and relatively little authority was granted to the national government. The Articles jealously guarded the sovereignty of the individual states. There was no national executive, no president, or judiciary. Congress was a unicameral, one house, a body. As opposed to possessing a House of Representatives and a Senate, in which each state received one vote. Furthermore, 9 of the 13 states had to approve a law for it to go into effect, and any changes to the article themselves required unanimous agreement. The Articles also denied Congress the power to tax the states or regulate their trade. Few wanted to fight a war for independence from a distant, tax-hungry national government. Great Britain only to replace the government with another possessed of equal or potentially tyrannical power. Consequently, the limitations imposed upon the national government created under the Article of Confederation were by design. This is the national government was intended to be weak. 1780, the critical period. Under the Articles of Confederation, the national government of the United States successfully won the Revolutionary War, negotiated the peace treaty with Paris, resolved conflicting state land claims, and established a system of territorial governance in the Northwest Territories. Most Americans, however, were far more interested in local as opposed to national affairs, and they were generally hostile to the suggestions that the national government be strengthened. By the mid-1780s, despite its significant achievements, the national government faced a thicket of increasingly tangled challenges. Most significantly, Congress was unable to address the mounting national debt and an economic depression that combined to destabilize the newly independent Confederacy. The United States had borrowed heavily to pay for the war against Great Britain. By 1783, the United States owed roughly $34 million to domestic creditors, and its foreign debt had within a few years grown to $10 million. Much of the foreign debt was owed to France and Dutch bankers, while domestic debt, Congress, was owed to American citizens who had contributed to the war effort, both as soldiers and suppliers. Congress, however, was unable to pay the money back. Though it could ask the states to contribute revenue to the national treasury, it could not force them to do so. The Continental Congress borrowed additional money just to pay the interest on the debt, and in 1786 the national government defaulted on its payments that it owed to France, Holland, and Spain. The state and the national governments had also paid for the war by printing money rather than raising taxes. Intense anti-tax rhetoric had fueled resistance to Parliament prior to the Revolution, and raising taxes to generate revenue was not a politically attractive opinion in the independent United States. According to historian John Fiske, a congressional delegate expressed the popular feeling when he asked, with unspeakable scorn, why he should vote to tax the people when Philadelphia printed press could turn out money by the bushel. By 1780, Congress had printed $241 million in paper money. Congress also issued simply certificates to supply certificates to American farmers and merchants during the war in lieu of payments for supplies. These promissory notes, a kind of an IOU, which were also issued to Continental soldiers and circulated like money, pumped in an additional $95 million into the economy. As more and more Continental dollars and promissory notes chased roughly the same amount of goods and services, however, these paper dollars rapidly depreciated. The results were runaway inflation and rapidly rising prices. In 1779, it took 42 in Continental paper dollars to buy goods worth 1 in gold or silver. Just 2 years later, the same dollar worth of goods required 146 Continental dollars. American economist Paleontol Webster asserted in 1791 that Americans were so frustrated with vain attempts by Congress to force value into paper money and compel the circulation of it, that their patience was all exhausted. I say these irrations and disappointments had so destroyed the courage and confidence of the people that they appeared heartless and among stupid when their attention was called to any new impositions. John Fiske notes that to say something was not worth a Continental dollar because the strongest possible expression of contempt. Foreign trade and personal debt. While much of America's economic distress was self-imposed, its former imperial masters added insult to injury. The British took action to hobble the American economy. Despite Thomas Paine's optimistic prediction early in the Revolution that independent American commerce would thrive so long as eating was custom in Europe, trade did not flourish in the 1780s. Part of the problem was that Great Britain took Americans at their word and began treating the United States, at least in the realm of commerce, as a truly independent nation. The Navigation Acts, despite the combined appeals of American diplomats and British West Indies sugar planters who depended upon supplies brought from North America, were applied to the Americas just as they were applied to the Dutch, the French, the Spanish, and other independent foreign nations. Americans were no longer be allowed to trade with their best market, the British West Indies. Parliament prohibited American trade with the British West Indies, but cheap manufactured goods imported from Great Britain flooded into the United States. This made the post-war economic slump even worse, as specie, gold and silver, flowed out of the United States to pay for the British goods. With the West Indies largely closed to the American shipping, it became increasingly difficult for the Americans to sell goods abroad and acquire the specie necessary to purchase British manufactured goods in cash. Consequently, British firms extended more and more credit to American merchants, who in turn sold these consigned goods to the American consumers on credit. Curtis Putnam Noddles argues that a network of debt soon covered the country, and ordinary American consumers often found themselves on the brink of bankruptcy. Protective tariffs. Great Britain prohibited American trade with the British West Indies, but continued to freely export its own goods into the American market. Normally, such inequitable trade relations would be challenged by the imposition of regulatory tariffs, import tax. In other words, high import tax would be used to keep British goods out of the United States until American goods were allowed into the West Indies. The Article of Confederation, however, did not allow the national government to regulate trade. The United States could not impose tariffs on foreign goods. Individual states might choose to impose tariffs on British goods, but this ran the risk of simply driving trade and commerce to another competing state. A unified trade policy was difficult, if not impossible, to achieve under the Article of Confederation. British competitors generally observed the difficulties piling up around the United States. America keeps receding further and further from peace, good order, prosperity, safety, and tranquility, crowded the European Magazine and London Review in August 1786. She bid adieu to all these comfortable ingredients of national felicity, when she broke off her relation to and connection with Great